See this guy? He's a monster. From August of 1957 to July of 1958, he took the lives of at least 3 young women in the Los Angeles area of California. Posing as a photographer, he lured aspiring models to his makeshift studio for detective magazine-style photo shoots, which involved the women being put into vulnerable positions. But the women soon realized that this was no ordinary photography session, as the creature drew a firearm and attacked them. Once he finished with his acts of evil, he would dump their bodies in the desert, keeping the disgusting pictures as trophies. The monster was not discovered until one of his victims was able to fight her way free from his clutches and rescued by police. Harvey Glatman, the Glamour Girl Slayer. Harvey Glatman was born in the Bronx on December 10, 1927, to parents Ophelia and Albert Glatman. Starting at an extremely young age, Harvey began acting out in very disturbing ways. He practiced all sorts of self-harm, but his primary method involved self-hanging from the rafters in his parents' attic. He was even caught at least once, but when his parents brought him to a doctor, they were told that he would grow out of it. When Harvey was 11 years old, the family moved to Colorado. He had a rough time at school, with kids making fun of his acne and big ears. Due to him not being able to socialize well with his peers, he was soon looking for an outlet for his interest in girls. Harvey began burglarizing homes and stealing women's undergarments. In at least one case, he also stole a pistol. Despite thieving in his free time, Glatman was an above-average student and participated in the Boy Scouts, taking a particular interest in ropes. He also developed a fascination with photography that would resurface as an adult in the darkest of ways. His criminal behavior also escalated. Instead of simply stealing women's clothing, he began accosting and groping them on the street, sometimes at gunpoint. In 1945, Harvey was caught breaking into an apartment window by police. When they searched him, they found a pistol as well as a rope. At the station, he confessed to other burglaries and was charged with first-degree robbery. But before he could be sent to jail, his parents bailed him out. Less than a month later, he kidnapped a woman and drove toward the Sunshine Canyon outside of Boulder, Colorado. He assaulted her, then drove her back home, and she reported the crime, quickly picking him out of a photo lineup. He was arrested and sentenced to a year in prison, though he would only serve 8 months. When he was released on July 27, 1946, his mother brought him to a psychiatrist, determined to fix whatever had made her son go so far astray. The diagnosis was a fear of women, with the recommendation of participating in activities like dancing to overcome it. Ophelia Glatman figured it would be best if her son relocated to escape the reputation that he had developed in Colorado. Harvey moved back to New York and began working at a television repair shop in Yonkers, utilizing the skills that he had learned in prison. Satisfied that her son was on the right path in New York, Ophelia headed back to Colorado. But once she was out of the way, the deteriorating Harvey returned to his true interests. He bought a realistic cap gun, and with it, a knife, and a length of rope, he began searching out people to victimize. On the night of August 17, 1946, he approached a man named Thomas Darrow and his girlfriend Doris Thorne. Brandishing the cap gun, Glatman ordered them off the sidewalk and into some trees where they would be out of sight of the road. Harvey took Thomas's wallet and tied him up, then began to caress Doris. He was so immersed in the disgusting act that he did not see as Thomas wriggled free of the ropes. A moment later, the two were grappling as the man tried desperately to protect his girlfriend. Harvey dropped the cap gun and drew the very real knife that he was carrying and slashed at Thomas, striking his shoulder before fleeing deeper into the woods to make his escape, leaving the injured couple shaken but not seriously injured. Not wanting to focus his depraved attentions in the same area for fear of arrest, the creature sought its next victim in Albany, New York. On the 22nd of August, he found his next target, a nurse named Florence Hayden. He approached from behind as she walked along Main Avenue. Once again using a toy gun, he threatened her and pulled her into a vacant lot. Florence would later tell police that as he fumbled to tie her wrists together, she realized that he was using both hands and was no longer holding the pistol. She took the opportunity to shove him off of her and screamed for help, causing Harvey to run. The creature continued this crime spree, but his disgusting acts had not escaped the attention of police. Police Commissioner James Kerwin made it a priority to get the culprit behind the attacks in the area. And soon, they saw a man matching the description given to them by Florence Hayden. When they searched his pockets, Glatman was again in possession of the toy gun, a knife, and some rope. Knowing his history in Colorado, the courts pushed to give the creep serious prison time. Judge Earl Gallup sentenced Glatman to 5 to 10 years behind bars. Due to his young age, he started his time at the Elmira Reformatory, where he was evaluated by medical professionals. During his 2 years there, he was labeled as a schizophrenic with dark impulses towards women. It was recommended that he continue to be examined once he was transferred to Sing Sing prison, but there is no record showing that this was followed up on. In fact, upon his arrival at the infamous prison, a cursory exam led to him being declared mentally fit with a high IQ. But as is the case with many criminals, Glatman had simply learned how to play the game and blend in among other people. And his act worked as he served less than 3 years of the sentence before he was paroled. He returned to Colorado to live with his parents and was monitored by the courts until September of 1956. Now free from parole, Glatman traveled westward to California, settling in the Los Angeles area in January of 1957. Seeing the huge number of aspiring models, he devised a plan to get women under his control by posing as a photographer, rather than accosting them on the street as he had done before. Continuing his work as a television repairman, the creature was able to afford a small apartment that doubled as a studio. He also came up with a variety of aliases that he would use when luring his victims, the first being Johnny Glenn. The twisted criminal's first victim in California was a 19-year-old woman named Judith Ann Dole. Judith was desperate for money to pay for a lawyer in a custody battle with her ex-husband and had placed a profile with a modeling agency where Glatman found her. He arranged to meet her on August 1st of 1957 with a story that he was going to hire her to pose for photos that would be used on detective magazine covers. Originally, they had arranged to do the photo shoot at her apartment, but when he arrived, he told her that the lighting was better at his own studio and convinced her to go along with him. Dole allowed Glatman to tie her wrists and ankles. When she was defenseless, he drew a .32 caliber Browning pistol, then continued snapping increasingly obscene photos of her. Eventually, he put down the camera and assaulted the young woman. As he finished, he sat with her watching TV for a while before announcing he was going to let her go, but had to do it out of town, presumably so he could escape before she reported him to police. Around 10:30 p.m., he loaded Judith into his car and drove out of the city. Glatman drove over 100 miles with the captive passenger, passing Palm Springs and Thousand Palms, before slowing down and parking in the desert outside of a city called Indio in Riverside County, where the Coachella Music Festival is held today. Instead of untying her as he had promised, the creature wrapped one end of a rope around her neck and the other around her ankles, then hoisted her up, leading to her death. Still not finished, the disgusting monster continued snapping even more perverse pictures of the poor young woman, then left her body in the desert. Judith Dole was not discovered until December 29th of 1957. The heinous act and depraved photos seemed to satisfy Harvey, as he did not commit another murder for several months. But on March 7th of 1958, he asked a young woman named Shirley Ann Bridgeford out on a date. He had found her just days before on the 1950s version of Tinder, the Patty Sullivan Lonely Hearts Club. Shirley was a 24-year-old divorcee with 2 sons, looking for a night on the town and possibly a new relationship that would be healthier than her recently ended marriage. She had arranged to get dinner and go square dancing with a man she knew as George Sullivan. Glatman picked her up just before 8 p.m. from her home in the Sun Valley neighborhood of L.A. He explained that he had a headache and asked if it would be all right if they went for a drive in the country rather than dancing after dinner, and Shirley agreed. After they ate, he drove her out to the desert near the Anza Borrego State Park in San Diego, then drew his pistol. He ordered her to undress, then assaulted and photographed her. Not satisfied with the flash on his camera, he waited with her there in the desert for the sun to rise before he continued documenting the crime. When he was done photographing the living Shirley, he used a garrote to strangle her, then took a few more photos before driving back to Los Angeles. The cooling-off period between the second and third murder was just over half as long as between the first two. On July 24th of 1958, he used the name Frank Johnson when he met with a model from one of the agencies. The woman was 24-year-old Ruth Mercado. Glatman followed the same procedure he had used with Shirley Bridgeford. Glatman even dumped the remains in the same area of the Anza Borrego State Park, where it was discovered 3 months later. By October, Harvey was once again contacting the agencies in search of a model. The woman running the agency got a strange feeling from the unkempt and smelly man she saw before her. Even so, she made arrangements with a woman to meet the man she knew as Frank Johnson on October 27, 1958. 27-year-old Lorraine Vigil had signed up with the agency shortly before, and this would be her first job. When Glatman picked Lorraine up, she realized he was not driving towards the studio, and when she mentioned it, he said due to a scheduling conflict, they were headed to his private studio in Anaheim. When they passed the city's exit, she became alarmed. The creature responded by pulling off the road and drawing his pistol. But instead of submitting, Lorraine fought back ferociously. In the struggle that ensued, the gun went off, grazing Lorraine's leg. In the moment of surprise, the young woman took advantage and lunged from the vehicle. As she did so, a car pulled along the road and she ran to it, still holding her attacker's gun. As it came closer, she realized that it was a police cruiser that had come into the area at the exact right moment. Lorraine dropped the pistol and began telling the two highway patrolmen what had happened. One of the men, Patrolman Tom Mulligan, would later tell how Harvey had stayed in his vehicle, muttering that none of it was his fault. Mulligan said that Glatman had a lunatic stare and that he would never forget the wild look in his eyes. Police would learn all about the monster's criminal record in both New York and Colorado. He also matched the description of the man who had been last seen with Shirley Bridgeford and Judy Dull. After 8 hours of intense questioning, Glatman finally broke, telling police that he was responsible for the murders of 3 women and that there was proof in a toolbox at his home. When police searched his apartment, they found the toolbox, and inside were dozens of photographs of the young women, both before and after their deaths. That very night, the district attorney had officers go with Glatman as he showed them where he had left the remains of his victims. Without the bodies, the killer could deny his confession if he had a change of heart. Harvey first took them to Shirley Bridgeford, whose skeleton had been chewed and partially carried off by wild animals. Then he took them to Ruth Mercado, whose skeleton was nearly intact. A day later, the creature led police to the remains of Judith Dull, but all they found were scraps of clothing, and would later find out that the skeleton had been discovered months earlier by hikers in December of the prior year and had gone unidentified until Glatman's confession. The trial took place in San Diego County, despite Los Angeles putting forward that the women had been abducted there, Riverside wanting to try him for the murder of Judith Dull, and Orange County wanting to try him for the attack on Lorraine Vigil. To build the case, DA James Don Keller had the killer interviewed once again. This time it was recorded and went into painstaking detail. Glatman spent 4 hours explaining every step of each of the 3 killings and his motivation in a near monotone. Investigators also interviewed the women's families, with Shirley's family identifying Glatman as the man who had come to pick her up. With a mountain of evidence and a guilty plea entered, the only question left was what would happen to Harvey Glatman. The creature's final day in court was December 15, 1958. After the taped confession and photos were shared with the court, Judge William Lowe sentenced Glatman to death for first-degree murder. Harvey was sent to death row at San Quentin Prison to await his execution. He would remain there until September 18th of 1959. That morning, Harvey Glatman was escorted to what is sometimes referred to as the Green Room. He was strapped to the table at 10 a.m. and locked in the chamber as cyanide pellets dropped into sulfuric acid, filling the air with toxic gas. By 10:12 that morning, Harvey Glatman was dead. There is one additional murder that Glatman is suspected of, which may mean that the series started years earlier, with many more unknown potential victims. In early March of 1954, a young woman named Dorothy Howard disappeared from Phoenix, Arizona. The 18-year-old had taken the bus to visit her aunt in Denver, Colorado, without telling her family and was never seen alive again. For decades, a body discovered on April 8th of 1954 had gone unidentified. The young woman had been stripped, beaten, and strangled. There were also bruises consistent with being hit by a car. The timing of the unsolved murder matches Glatman's timeline. This would have been after he got out of prison, while he was still on parole, supposedly being monitored by the court in Colorado. However, there was no evidence to connect him to the crime, aside from circumstances and proximity. Dorothy went unidentified until 2009, as no one had known where she had gone, and so they would see no connection to her disappearance and a body found in another state. But investigators continued to work the case for more than 50 years, and an artistic rendering was even shown on the TV show America's Most Wanted. The DNA was eventually tested in 2009, and a woman was found to be a sibling match. When interviewed, the pieces suddenly all came together. A small consolation for the family's loss, but at least her surviving relatives have some sort of closure.